Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you might be in the world. We are absolutely honoured to have Tridge with us, who's got up very early. Hang on, live, live. Oh, we live, apparently. Yeah, and Tridge is going to talk through some of the misconceptions around remote ID and the open source world, and it's quite a day for this conversation to come up. So, hang on, let's get Louis. Louis come as well. There's Louis as well. So, Tridge,
G'day, Louis.
What's your thoughts on this? What's the misconceptions that you're seeing that come into the world?
So I saw a few things. I watched last week's stream. I quite enjoyed watching Drone and Sundry. Don't watch all the episodes, but quite a few of them. So you got at least one in the audience. There you go. So, yeah. Oh, I've gone blurry again. Oh, that's probably a good thing. Yeah. Shall I try and fix my camera? There you go. I'll go and do the camera switch and
I'd like
switch
to
camera.
See the look at the back of a monitor. I always enjoy.
There you go. There's the back of my monitor. So you have to, with this one, I have to switch cameras to fix it. All right. So, there were a couple of things I noted that a couple of misconceptions from last week's stream. The first is that you can't implement remote ID as open source, and that's been that notion that you can't do that has been around for quite a long time. It was actually pushed by somebody in the industry who has a vested interest in Ardupilot not succeeding, and they tried to push this out by trying to tell companies running Ardupilot, oh no, they're going to be dead when remote ID comes out. You've got to switch to our system, right? And it was sort of a sort of thing we've come to expect from that particular person. But anyway, you can probably guess. Anyway, we actually set up. This was last year sometime. We set up a meeting with the FAA and had a chat to them, and so a bunch of people from the Ardupilot dev team and representative FAA. We had a chat, and they confirmed that they have they're license agnostic, and that it's not a problem. The implementation's being open source. So the people usually make that claim about not being open source because of a few misconceptions, and they generally make the claim for a couple of reasons. They say, well, okay, so if the source code is available, how can you make it? And it usually centers around the tamper resistance wording, right? And mostly it's made by people who haven't actually read the tamper resistance wording. So I'm just bringing up the ASTM doc at the moment on my screen. So the wording in the tamper resistance doc, if I can find this, so the wording is, so the ASTM, for those who don't know, so there's the FAA rules, and then there's the ASTM means of compliance. And the easiest way to become compliant is to implement the ASTM means of compliance, because that means of compliance has already been accepted by the FAA as a valid way to comply with the remote ID rules, right? And by the way, I don't love remote ID. If I had a button on my desk where I could say, no more remote ID, we're not doing it, right? I would press it in a heartbeat. So I'm not saying remote ID is a good thing. I'm just doing my best as an engineer to implement it so that Ardupilot can continue and all the companies using it can continue, making and selling drones, and the community can continue, and lots of great things, right, can happen. So just wanted to make it clear that, I'm not a fan of the concept, and there are many problems with the concept, many of which you guys have pointed out quite rightly. Thanks, Bruce. Okay, so the actual wording in the ASTM, so the ASTM means of compliance is the method that we have chosen to follow, because going through the rigmarole of getting our own means of compliance ratified would be a hell of a task, right? So the ASTM one says the unmanned aircraft must be designed and produced in a way that reduces the ability of a person to tamper with remote identification functionality. So it's actually quite a weak wording. Reduces the ability of a person to tamper. Now, it doesn't say you got to lock it down like Fort Knox, right? It doesn't say that this has to be immune to somebody with a hardware debugger and, you know, ST-Link and, you know, and all those sort of tools. It doesn't say any of that, right? It is just they want you to be able to, they want you to reduce the ability of a person to tamper. Now, interpreting exactly what that means can be quite tricky. And so the next really important thing I'd like to point out is that projects like Ardupilot and Betaflight and iNav are not themselves directly subject to the FAA remote ID regulation because we don't sell drones, right? There are companies that sell drones that incorporate those flight stacks. So
and
there are.
Tridge,
I'm sorry, Louis?
and also Ardupilot, Betaflight, and iNav are flight stacks. The communication to the ground and to the ID is different from the flight stack, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's sort of splitting hairs a little bit, but we supply Ardupilot just by itself, right, is not subject to remote ID, but lots of companies sell products with Ardupilot, and we want to make life as easy as possible for them, right? Because we like the fact that there is a whole lot of companies that use it, and that's great. We're delighted that they're using Ardupilot, and we want them to be able to continue to do so. We also love the user community, all the hobbyists, all the enthusiasts and we want those people to be able to continue what they're doing with Ardupilot with minimal disruption. Okay, so what does it mean to say reduces the ability of a person to tamper? So the simplest thing to start with is there shouldn't be a user-facing parameter, right, where the user can go in and say, oh, I don't want remote ID today, right? So they can't just have a parameter that turns that off. And that in by itself, a simple interpretation would be if there isn't a parameter that you can set to do that, then you have reduced the ability to tamper as far as the Ardupilot flight, the actual flight software is concerned. Now, so we have the ability, have had for years, the ability to set parameters as read-only, right? In a firmware, you can mark the following parameters are the defaults, and these parameters cannot be changed. And as long as you're running that firmware, then you can't change it. Okay, then the obvious thing is, well, what if they upload a different firmware, right? And we do have mechanisms for marking in the bootloader which firmwares you're allowed to load, right? We have a thing called a board ID, and this is something where it's a little bit trickier for something like Betaflight or iNav because the path that they use to get firmware to users, they mostly load with DFU. So the most common way people load a firmware is DFU, and the DFU bootloader is fixed in the ROM of the chip. It's not something you can change very easily. You can't build an ID into it easily to change what it does. Whereas Ardupilot doesn't use DFU to load the firmware. We have our own bootloader, right? The Ardupilot bootloader. And that bootloader has a whole bunch of interesting features in it, right? Which has had for years, well before remote ID. And that bootloader includes things like board identifiers. So what we presented, and you guys can see the link to we gave a presentation to Ardupilot commercial partners a couple of weeks ago. And we released the slides of that presentation. The actual presentation went into a lot more detail with the partners, and we don't make that public. But the slides detail, the processes we're going through. And one of those is that we're using the read-only parameters and the board identifiers to make it so that an end user who is just following the standard interfaces, pressing buttons, if they press a button in Mission Planner to load a new firmware and they try to load a firmware without the remote ID support, it will fail, right? If they try to change a parameter to disable the remote ID functionality, that will fail. It'll just say it's a read-only parameter, you can't change that, right? So that's the simplest level. Now, there's other levels you can go to, right? We can support mechanisms with, signed bootloaders, with signed firmware. We can ratchet things up to a whole lot of different levels. And what is appropriate is actually going to be vendor specific and depends on the situation for the individual company. So what we as a project are trying to do is offer a menu of options that the vendors who are trying to comply, because it's the vendors who are selling the drones that have to actually meet these regulations. And we just want to make their lives as easy as possible, while also, maintaining the development processes we've got in Ardupilot. So we are offering a set of options that give the vendors the ability to comply, and they can choose exactly which level they will apply based on their own assessment of their mock and how it applies to their particular vehicle, because it does actually turn out to be dependent upon the individual vehicle, its hardware, how things are set up. So anyway, that's the basic thing. Yes, you can implement remote ID in an open source stack. It's not trivial. One of the reasons I'm bleary-eyed is because I have spent a lot of time working late coding. I was up till quite late last night working with Roll from Bluemark, who makes a remote ID module, and with Jeff from Wurzbach Electronics, and try to work through some of the issues regarding the prototype transmitter modules that we've got. So running on these little devices, right? So that's a ESP32C3, which is a pretty cheap, like $20 Australian, which means sort of $1 in any other reasonable currency. So these little devices, and we've got an implementation of a transmitter module, the one that actually does the Bluetooth and the Wi-Fi announcements running on that, and we've released the source code for that, right? We wrote a firmware for that, and we're hoping that will be useful not just for Ardupilot, right? I would love to chat to one of the devs in the Betaflight or iNav community to see if we can collaborate, if they're interested. I know at the moment many in the community are just in shock over the fact that the lawsuit was lost, and the sky is falling, but if they get to the stage where they actually want to start considering implementation methods, I'd love to work with them at an engineering level and see if we can, find some common solutions and, not have to re-implement everything several times. We've had some great collaborations with other projects in the past. We added, for example, in our peripheral firmware, we added MSP support, right? Not because Ardupilot uses MSP, but because it helped iNav and Betaflight to use those GPSs and, barrows and compasses and things, right? So we have a collaboration channel for collaboration with projects. Anyway, if there's anyone watching from those communities, and if they are, core devs and they'd like to discuss the details of the technical details of how they might meet the requirements of the standard remote ID, very happy to chat.
And
there you go, off the soapbox.
Better thing is to start by watching the PowerPoint that Tridge presented to the partner community.
That's right. The slides. There's some slides I put together, and they've been published. They're up on our Discourse server. So there were a few other things that there was talk about the patent, Kanji's patent, or Kenji's patent, and again, there's a few misconceptions around that. Mostly the misconceptions are the common misconceptions about patents, and people don't know how to read patents. I did a long talk at one of the Linux conferences on how to read patents. If you do a Google search for, Tridge patents or Andrew Tridgell and patent, you'll probably find a video, and you might like to watch the video because I describe how to read patents. I spent many years in IBM working with patent lawyers working on patent defense. And I learned a lot in that time that the common way that engineers read patents is not very useful. You have to read them in a very particular way. And for that particular patent, I have had a look at it. There's 2 independent claims, and that's all that matters as far as, because what you would do is you would use a non-infringement defense, and as there's only 2 independent claims, you only have to actually examine 2 of the claims, because that's the independent ones are all that matter for a non-infringement defense. And it's very clear that the companies that we're dealing with and the project Ardupilot do not implement all of the elements of those 2 claims. And if you don't implement all of the elements of an independent claim, then you are not infringing. So it's a pretty darn clear cut and dried case. Now, by the way, the guy who filed that patent, I suspect, and I've heard, from other people, that in fact he did it with the very best of intentions, and that he really doesn't. He's concerned about the privacy implications of remote ID, and those are very serious. I completely agree with the privacy and safety concerns around remote ID, and I think that that's going to become a major issue. So in some ways, the patent might be there basically as a protest, as an attempt, right? But the patent system is a very difficult mechanism to try to achieve, a goal of killing off this type of regulation. And just from my reading of the patent, I don't believe it's achieved that goal, but I'm very sympathetic with the with the aim of reducing the impact of remote ID, and so I have a lot of sympathy with, assuming that was his goal.
But aren't you?
I have a lot of
Aren't
sympathy
you
with that.
enabling it? If you like the world's cleverest bloke that are making solutions for loads. I'm sorry, I'm having a pop at you now, but you're having you're enabling it and making it possible. You're doing the regulator's job by making a hard thing.
Well,
easy.
okay. So I
sorry.
There've been lots. No. It's a perfectly fair question. Perfectly fair. So there are several different ways you can approach this, right? You could try the the protest approach and say, well, I'm going to just fly without remote ID, and that will show them, right? Okay. Now I've heard that, and the thing is, I'm in Australia. If I declare to CASA, I'm going to fly without remote ID, they're going to say, what the hell are you talking about? We don't have remote ID. So there's not a lot I can do as far as the, I'm going to fly my drone without it. Right. So if I was in the US, I could consider going and, I don't know, standing in front of some representative's office and waving a flag, maybe. I don't know. I'm not much of a protester. I'm a software engineer. So I do applaud the people who are attempting to try to get the regulation changed, or some of the sharp edges knocked off it at the very least. And I think that's great work. And I think the timelines involved for implementation are incredibly difficult, and the privacy and safety concerns are very, very real and haven't been addressed. So I agree with all of that, and I'm cheering the people who are trying to do something about that. That's great. But meanwhile, I also don't want all of the, huge number of businesses that rely on Ardupilot to go under while we're protesting. And because if they can't legally sell, their drones anymore as of 16th of next month, this is only weeks away, then that's really bad. And I think it's my role as, I'm the systems lead for Ardupilot, so I look after the, low-level systems, and so it seems fairly obvious that I should try and implement this in such a way that they can be compliant, and to try to make life as easy as possible for them. So that's what we're doing. Now, I should say, by the way, that there's lots of people in the Ardupilot dev team working on this, and there's several people in the Ardupilot dev team who know a heck of a lot more about remote ID than I do. Jeff Wurzbach's been working on this stuff for years, trying to make the ASTM standard a lot better, the mock better. He's been lobbying for years and years, right, on this, and he's put a huge amount of time into it, and he knows a hell of a lot more about remote ID than I do. So I'm coming at it from a software engineering point of view, right, where what I can do is I can write some code, and that's my solution to most problems. You know, it's if I need a cup of coffee, I go and write a coffee roasting application, right? And which I literally have, you know. As
knowing you, you probably do.
So, well, I have, you know, I've got a coffee roaster that runs Python.
So now we know where Pornhub came from.
Yeah, maybe not. So, you know, my solution to everything is to write code, right? So because that's what I know how to do. And so obviously I went to write code, and we've written some code, and we believe that that code allows vendors selling Ardupilot-based vehicles to be compliant with the remote ID specification. It's painful, right? There are things that are harder to do under remote ID. It's painful, it costs time and effort, and it's, yeah, we would much rather it wasn't necessary. Necessary as in the regulatory necessary, not necessary as in, you know, anyway, we're getting justifications of remote ID. That's probably a different topic. But we want those companies to still be able to be in the US market. So, you know, we implement it.
But we're not. We've got to wait till the 16th of September. But it's going to be very interesting to see. And I haven't seen maybe. Well, actually, Mark, you had a question. Let's go for Mark first, and I'll go on.
So USA is getting remote ID. A lot of the rest of the world isn't. How will the Cube? How will it affect me here? Do I have to have remote ID because the American market?
No, gosh, no. One of the things conditions I put on all of the patches. There's a whole lot of patches have gone in. It's gone into the first stable release with support for remote ID went out a couple of days ago. I put it out on Sunday afternoon my time. That's the plain 4.2.3 stable release. Okay, now it is optional and it is off by default. So there's a few misconceptions of this. First of all, there is nothing in the remote ID that says that, you know, when you buy one of these, right, and it arrives, that it should have any remote ID on it, right? Because it's not a drone. It's a piece of electronics with a bunch of sensors in it. It's got no motors. It can't, well, you can throw it and it might fly, but, you know, Philip might not like that. You know, it's not a drone, okay? It's not buzzing. There's no reason why people can't, you know, sell, ship, etc. Flight controllers, right, without remote ID on it. There's no reason why our standard firmwares should have remote ID in them, because there's nothing in the regulation, there's nothing proposed that would say that we have to have that, right? But vendors who are making drones, so take a company that's making medical delivery drones, right? They're making drones that you know, take I don't know, blood samples around, or they're delivering vaccines or whatever, and Ardupilot based companies do that, and it's great stuff. I love supporting companies like that, right? In order for them to comply, they've got to make sure that their drones that they sell have this feature enabled, and that it has, you know, as the wording says, it reduces the ability of a person to tamper with the remote identification functionality, quoting from the mock. Okay, so we have a set of recipe for the vendors to follow, that when they are putting that drone together, before they ship it to their customers, not to you, right? When they ship it to their customers, they enable this feature, right? Because that's their legal responsibility. And so they have to build the firmware, right? We've got options and instructions on how to build the firmware with this feature enabled. And so, no, it's not coming to if you want to play with it. I mean, some of your listeners might actually enjoy playing with this stuff. It's quite, you know, $20, you get one of these little things, and it's quite fun that, you know, you fire it up and then you fire up an app on your phone, and hey presto, you know, you can play with Bluetooth. And I've quite enjoyed the technical side of playing with the Bluetooth packets and the Wi-Fi packets and that sort of thing, right? And so if any of your people want to try that, I mean, there's also been some discussion about whether we try to, use this stuff for swarming, actually use packets, these same types of packets, Bluetooth long range going between vehicles, use it as a telemetry link, use it to control swarms of vehicles, to do light shows with Bluetooth long range. I mean, there's some fun things you can do with this stuff. So if you want to do that sort of thing, go for it, right? But there's no obligation that you actually implement remote ID.
I suppose from that point of view, Tridge, you're already transmitting the data, aren't you? So you're actually telling every other aircraft where you are. So it's actually useful data from a swarming point of view and things like that.
I mean, we've had a scalability issue with light shows. I mean, there are lots of light show companies that use Ardupilot with, some of the really massive light shows, some of the record-breaking ones run Ardupilot, and there's some interesting scalability issues, and the radio technologies behind that are really quite interesting. And I think Bluetooth, we haven't really looked at Bluetooth for that before, but I've been playing a bit with Bluetooth long range. So I have been running remote ID on my drone because I've been testing the code, right? So I've been running, I ran this little one. So this is what I had in my drone last weekend. So this is a ESP32S3. This is the dual core. It's a bit bigger. You'll notice. So that's the S3, whereas that's the little C3, right? So either one of them can run the code. I was running this S3, and then I've got a CAN transceiver. You can see the high quality engineering, of me putting that CAN transceiver on, and then there's a JST GH4 pin. That's CAN. Right, and so that plugs into the CAN, one of the CAN ports of the Cube Orange, and then I flew the drone out, under my EV loss permissions out to 1 kilometer, and saw that the vehicle showed up, and it was actually quite fun.
Showed up on what? Do you have an app on your
phone? On my phone. Yeah, I've got the app on the phone. I actually had to go and buy a new phone because, funnily enough, so nearly every phone has Bluetooth, but there's lots of different Bluetooth standards. And I'd just recently bought a Pixel 6, right, because my previous phone died. And this is quite a recent, Pixel 6 is a pretty recent phone, and turned out that it claims to support Bluetooth 5, but it can't receive any Bluetooth 5 advertising packets. So it turns out it can only get the Bluetooth 4, which is much shorter range, which means with my new expensive phone, my drone is only visible to a couple of 100 meters, right? But I went and bought a second-hand Samsung Galaxy S10e, right, off eBay. And this one does all of the fancy Bluetooth things. It can do Bluetooth 5 long range, and it does all of the different, codings and things. And so it actually receives happily out to 1 kilometer. It'll probably go a lot more than 1 kilometer. It's just that, I'm only comfortable flying up to 1 kilometer in the flying area that I'm in. So plus my EV loss is limited to 1.5 Ks.
Where can we get the app? Where can we get your app?
Oh, it's in the Play Store. It's not my app. It was written by Open Drone ID. So it's called Open Drone ID in the Play Store. So Bruce, why don't you get yourself one of these little C3s? So it's just on Mouser or eBay or whatever. It's an ESP32C3. You can just flash the code. We've got pre-compiled binaries for it and instructions up on our website, on the Ardu Remote ID website, which is an open source implementation. I believe it's the only open source implementation of this transmitter stuff, of the Bluetooth 5 at least. It was the only one that does the Bluetooth 5, which is the long range one.
So what's the duty cycle of your transmission?
It's a little bit complex with the different Bluetooth packets, but basically 1 hertz for all of the data, but on 3 different transmission modes. So we've got Wi-Fi NAN, neighbor area network packets. We've got Bluetooth 4 legacy. There's different types of encodings and bit rates and things on Bluetooth 4. And then there's the Bluetooth 5 long range S8 coded various things. The guy who's been helping with the Bluetooth stuff is Roel from Bluemark. So Bluemark in the Netherlands makes some of these remote ID modules. And he's just recently joined as an Ardupilot partner, and I've been working very closely with him on the Bluetooth side of things. It's been great. So there's basically 3 different modes of transmission. There are other modes of transmissions allowed in the standard. Like, for example, Wi-Fi beacon packets, which can also be quite long range, but we haven't implemented those yet. So we've implemented 3 modes of transmission, which is sufficient to meet the standards. We probably will add Wi-Fi beacon at some stage just for completeness. And then when you build the firmware, if you use the pre-compiled firmware that we provide, it just does all 3. But when you build it, there's options to say, I only want Wi-Fi NAN, I only want Bluetooth 4, I only want Bluetooth 5, whatever. And the reason for that is interference, right? Because you're starting to have a transmitter. It's going to be, a small drone right next to your GPS, and, blasting out, 20 dBm, 100 milliwatt type transmissions right next to your GPS, generally considered a bad thing.
And your RC receiver, which is probably also on 2.4.
I was expecting problems with RC because they're both 2.4, as you say, and I was expecting there to be RC problems, but I didn't have any RC problems. It actually worked rather well. Maybe I should show you my integration, given we're doing
is that the one
show and tell here.
Tridge, is that the one? Is that the Open Drone ID OSN?
That's Open Drone ID, that's right. So why don't I'm just going to find a photo to show you the install that I did in my plane of this stuff, just to show you how high tech, and this is why you don't have software engineers during hardware, right? How do I share a photo here?
You should be able to share down.
Share button. Ooh, okay. This is getting complex, right? Okay, so let me just share a photo here. There you go. Share. Can you see that? You guys see that?
Hang on. Add the stream. Here it comes. I've got to add it, unfortunately.
That's beautiful. Right. It's gorgeous, isn't it?
Don't you love it? Yeah. So this is why software engineers shouldn't be allowed anywhere near hardware, right? I actually was quite proud of my install. I think it's quite. See, the autopilot's actually lined up, with the front and back of the vehicle.
Is it stuck down, Tridge? Is it actually stuck down?
No. So they're just hanging. This is a free space install. It's held by. That's right. Very sophisticated. So what it is, so that's the transmitter module down here. You can see it down the ESP32S3. Then this is the CAN transceiver hanging in the air above it. And then I just wrap the cable around the spar here and then plug it into my CAN bus up here. And this goes out to I know it goes at least a kilometer because that's how far I went, but it was still getting plenty of signal over a kilometer. It would have gone further. But this would not actually be a compliant implementation. It's compliant on the software side, but it would not be compliant on the hardware side. You do have to, there's probably some minimum standard of sticky tape you need. I haven't met that, and I suspect the FAA wouldn't be impressed by a free space install like this.
How are you meeting the self-diagnostic requirement? It has to prove that it's working before it enables you to arm the craft.
So that's an interesting one. Basically, the transmitter module itself checks that the Bluetooth is running. Now, so it actually, if any of the bring up of the Bluetooth stack and the Wi-Fi stack fails, then the transmitter module marks it doesn't give the ready to arm packet back to the flight controller, right? Now, our understanding is you don't have to actually have a receiver that receives one of the packets and close the loop that way. You could. So you could actually have that in the app, and it's quite possible the FAA might come back later and say, "Oh, we actually want to have that." In which case, okay, you have to fire up the app and get confirmation coming through. It'd be a pain, but you could do it, right? But all we're doing at the moment is we're using the Espressif status. Basically, there's a whole bunch of status codes from the Espressif Wi-Fi and Bluetooth stacks that tell you whether you're actually transmitting. And that this stuff is working and that all of the packets are parsed correctly and properly formatted and have all the right fields in them and all of that stuff. So we check those types of things, and then we've got this ARM status packet that then comes back from this little module, right, back into the flight controller, and it can come over the CAN bus or over a serial port. We could easily add MSP support to that. If the Betaflight iNav community wants to do this over MSP, you could do that, right? Easy. And then comes back into the flight controller, tells the flight controller you're good to go, you're allowed to arm or not, right? And if you compile Ardupilot with these features in, that is a mandatory check, right? So if this firmware has that in, you can't just say, oh, I'm going to force arm, you know, I'm just going to, but it'll just say, nope, can't do that, right? But if you don't have this special firmware where you've compiled in the option, none of this. It just doesn't do it.
And this is why your 250 run gram ready to fly model of a Piper Cub is now a thing of the past in the USA.
Yeah, there probably are. Look, it's much more difficult for those smaller vehicles, much more difficult. And I haven't really been looking into those. I think there may be some ways to become compliant with those. I was rather hoping, and some people told me that there's like I'm not the expert on remote ID. There's other people in the FTL a lot more. There's something about the 250 gram models. It might not be, you know, such a requirement, but that's not my area. I'm concentrating on what's needed for next month for the 16th of September, which is the standard remote ID for the commercial vehicles being sold. And commercial vehicles sort of start at like 30 kilograms, you know, and so I don't know how many grams this is, but it's not a lot. It's not going to add significant payload, right, to those big vehicles. But yeah, life is going to be, it's a lot more difficult for the really small models. I hope that by the time, I think it's next year, October next year, something like that. I think the
September
start
next
to come
year,
in.
I think. It's
September,
exactly a year after, I think, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. I'm not sure. So maybe before that timeline, there will be a little bit of, you know, give from the FAA, and because those small models are wonderful to watch, and it'd be a real shame if remote ID makes those not viable, both in terms of weight and cost and complexity and power and, you know, all those things.
Yeah, but you got to look at the threat they pose to the national airspace.
Regarding,
as I say, I'm not defending remote ID here.
Tridge, I know.
Tridge, regarding the entire Ardupilot stack, can you please tell something about the rover?
Rover? Well, I believe that rovers don't need remote ID, so do rovers. Boats, you know, sailing boats, submarines. There's no remote ID for submarines yet. So you know, you could all have fun with Ardusub. But yeah, I mean, we support. I mean, we've got one satellite running Ardupilot.
Yeah.
So we go all the way from a satellite down to, you know, submarines and boats and all sorts of things.
So just people know, this is at the moment limited to things that go up in the air. So
yeah, the FAA doesn't have jurisdiction, as far as I know, to rovers and boats and satellites, and yeah. So I don't think they have jurisdiction of satellites. Maybe somebody else knows better.
They do get them there. They do get
the remote ID. The range of the remote ID would have to be a bit longer. You know,
just the 20-foot parabolic dish fixes that.
Bluetooth 5 is just not going to cut it from the satellite.
Bluetooth 6 will be the solution.
Indeed, yeah, you'd be okay.
There's one side effect that I noticed they haven't thought about is people fly now with like cinema stuff and that they're flying larger than 250 gram drones indoors to get shots, sweeping shots indoors where you can't get a GPS fix. So how are they going to do that? Because it's a standard requirement.
There is actually stuff in the mock about that. I don't know whether you read through the mock, Bruce, there's stuff about urban canyons and indoor flying, right? And if you look for the word canyon in the ASTM doc, it has some explanatory words around that. So they have thought about it.
ASTM doc. We can't afford that expensive document. Can you flip us a copy, mate? Because I can't afford the money.
Yeah. All right. So I can read out a little bit. Okay. It says, the PFST does not require establishing a location fix or specific accuracy to pass. Under certain conditions, indoors, or GNSS canyon, this may not be possible, right? And so there is some small amount of wordage around indoor and urban canyons, you know, GPS canyons.
How are they going to implement that though? Because how do you know if you're indoors or you just put tinfoil over the GPS receiver?
I don't know yet. I don't know yet about that. That's one that.
That's either got to be a bypass or it can't force stop a flight in lack of GPS. That's.
But you need to understand that the FAA isn't. They're not trying to lock things down. Like they want the average person, not to be able to go and fly next to emergency vehicles and interfere with them, right? Then if people end up flying indoors, they're not. I don't think they're actually going to be worried.
This has been sold not to stop people flying near emergency vehicles; it's to hold people accountable and stop bad actors from doing bad things.
Motivation aside, what they think of the motivation and what you see the motivation would be, of course, different, right? And I've seen some of the videos and things, and I'm not trying to justify it, but there is some wording in there, and there's at least some of the wording related to urban canyons and indoor flight. And my naive interpretation of that is that indoor flight would actually be okay. You're allowed to pass the pre-flight self-test indoors. Right.
Yeah.
And you're allowed to take off in urban canyons where you can't meet the accuracy requirements of GPS, right? Because there's too much multipath, etc. So they have actually. This was thought about. Whether it's been thought about in sufficient depth to cover all the situations, I don't know. Right, because that's not
how you would implement that.
That's not what I'm concentrating on at the moment. Yeah. Okay, so I'm just trying to meet this deadline of next month, get all the pieces in place so that the companies selling Ardupilot-based vehicles aren't left in the lurch.
Do you want to come to David's question there? If he's still on LinkedIn, do I have to have remote ID if I'm flying a sanctioned model flying site? I'm not sure. What do we?
No, you don't. If it's a standard remote ID, it can't be disabled, so you will need to have it. But if it's a module, you won't need it. But there are no sanctioned sites yet. There's not even.
That's what I was going to say.
Will be by September next year.
No, there are.
Right.
No, there aren't by September this year.
No. But it's not needed till next year. But yes, when you sell the vehicle, I believe there may be exceptions if you're selling it to defence or selling it to police departments and things. There may be exemptions to those. But yeah, I've heard there aren't any freers yet. I haven't checked myself because I'm in Australia. I'm not really hooked into all that.
There's no CBOs.
My guess is that there will be freers, I would guess the AMA is negotiating stuff for getting freers at AMA flying sites. But I'm not involved in any of that, so I don't know for sure. But I would guess there would be.
There's a bunch of people.
Once again, it's an issue that the vendor will have to determine, and if it sells to the police or some kind of exception, provide the drones with the necessary adaptations on the remote ID modules. So it's not something that Tridge just provides the tool, and the vendor will adapt it to the specific context that the vehicle will operate.
The vendor may well, if this, they might be allowed to sell people who are only going to fly in Free Air. Maybe there's some, declaration they can do. I will only be flying in this Free Air, or I don't know. That's up to people in the US to work out, and that's. I don't need to currently worry about it, and we've got enough work to do getting this stuff implemented. So, I'm leaving that for
that was more of a general.
The future.
I wasn't really directing that at Tridge. That's a more of a general thing. I think that, yes, as Bruce has said, there are actually, as we sit here all around the world, there are no sanctioned model flying sites in the USA according to the FAA.
Okay.
They haven't actually made.
I imagine that'll change. Yeah.
They haven't made anybody a CBO yet. it's a real golden ticket, isn't it? So the man from the FAA is going to have the funny suit and the hat and the great class elevator and all that sort of thing, and chocolate bars to send these golden tickets out for whoever finally gets these freers. And
I would hope it would be done in bulk. Like declare all AMA registered flying sites. A bit
Well,
like
they've
was
already
done with
said-
MAAA in Australia, with the the drone registration stuff in Australia,
Yeah.
where you have to have a serial number, right? And the MAAA, which is the Australian equivalent of the AMA, they negotiated with CASA, and all of the flying sites, the MAAA flying sites, got exemption that you didn't need to have those serial numbers, and you didn't need to pay your whatever, it's $20 or $30 or whatever per drone. But you were also able to add on sites. So one of the flying sites I fly at is we've got just added on to my MAAA flying field as an additional site, which means you don't need it there either, because you can register additional sites just by going to your club, who redirects you to the state body. The state body writes down the address, and this sort of thing, and they add it in, right? It was actually, I wish I didn't need to do it, but it was not hard, right?
Well, the FAA have done quite the opposite. I think I'm still right in saying that they've said once a site has closed, once a declared site is closed, that's it. They're not going to allow it to be a site again. So if an AMA field shuts down, that's it gone.
The bigger effect is being, people like flying off lakes, flying flying off with float planes off water, these sort of things. They're probably not going to get them all as free as so. And if they have to do standard remote ID, the real pain in remote ID, with standard remote ID, is the operator location. It's not the vehicle's location, right? The vehicle's location, that's painful, sure, but it's not nearly as painful as getting an accurate operator location. And particularly if people are flying like with a Tyrannus or a Radio Master TX16 or whatever, there needs to be mechanisms to get operator location up for standard remote ID, and so there's going to need to be some hardware churn to make that possible. And that's
you just have your phone. Your phone talks to the remote ID module, and your phone's in your pocket, and there's your operator.
As long as you're flying within the range of the Bluetooth between your phone and the drone, right? And most phones can only do Bluetooth 4, which is pretty small range. So if you're flying in a couple of 100 meters, yeah, sure. But, fixed wings, 200 meters, you've barely taken off. So you really need the Bluetooth 5 long range, and that gets tricky, right? Because they require continuous update of the operator location for the US standard, a 1 hertz update of operators. You can't just use the takeoff location in the, Anyway, I'm looking at this interesting video up on the screen at the moment. So tell me.
So this is the incident in the UK, I think 2 days ago or yesterday,
right.
where this chap turns up, chats with the drone operator's been flying, doing a commercial real estate flight, and this guy's walked up to him and threatened him with this weapon. So of course, in the future,
before he tried to shoot the drone down.
Yeah, 3 times. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
the best line is,
so
don't point. You pointed the
that's
drone.
a fairly extreme case, but I don't know what to say.
Funny,
this is
not
US. The Cotswolds.
This is not US. It's in England. Come on, a guy.
Yeah, unfortunately, no country has a monopoly on idiots.
Yes, that's true.
We're doing our best.
Weapons.
Yeah. Oh, I've got all fuzzy again.
You're not even allowed weapons like that in this country. So and there's full face on shot. If that isn't fake, how has he not been arrested yet?
It'll be an
He was
airsoft or a
arrested.
BB gun.
He was detained for 12 hours and released.
Was he giving his gun back?
Well, look, allegedly it's a BB gun, a pellet gun, or some other thing.
Yeah.
So you'll say it's not a real gun, but that's actually it is an offence to brandish a weapon in the UK, as it is in most countries. It's dealt with quite easily here. They would have just shot him, and then they would have looked to see if it was real or not. They wouldn't have asked questions of it. They would have shot him. That would have been it for doing that in the open.
But bearing in mind what's happened in the UK in the last 12 hours.
Yes, you've sadly had a very sad case.
I'm surprised it's been taken as lightly as someone's been let out after 12 hours, because we've just had a 9-year-old girl shot and killed in her own house. Her mother shot through not similar circumstances, but circumstances that we've suddenly we're not a country that has gun crime. Yet in the last week, we've had more gun crime than I can ever remember, which is a bit weird. It's funny, Tridge, I was going to ask you about the operator location. That's the one thing that has been
that's one of the most difficult.
Well, that's I'm going to run it again, but that's the.
So we've got methods that the slight good news is because they've got various the position accuracy requirements in the standard are actually higher for the operator than it is for the drone, right?
That was the Z
which is
problem,
interesting. Though luckily they don't want the barometric for the drone. For the vehicle, they want both barometric and geometric altitude. For the operator, they only want the geometric, which is great. So you don't have to actually have a baro there or meet standards. But they have, oddly enough, the Forestry Service in the US did a bunch of testing as part of the whole ASTM standard development, and they tested a whole bunch of phones, and they basically concluded that any mobile phone 2019 or newer, I think it was, they had a table in the standard about, you know, phone accuracies, and I believe it came out that, I'm trying to rip my memory from last week, which at my age, you know, is pretty terrible. So the phones from 2019 and newer basically met the accuracy requirements. So essentially, the recent mobile devices are deemed to meet the accuracy requirements, which means using a mobile device is the simplest way, like a phone is the simplest way to achieve that. Then the trick is, how do you get that data off the phone and up to the vehicle to be broadcast out the dongle? And we've got a bunch of methods that we've, you know, developed to do that, and we're working with the Ardupilot partners for them to get those things implemented. So we've got a prototype in Mission Planner, and we've got the ability to, you know, to Bluetooth tether your phone through to the ground station and up to the vehicle, and that gives us a technique for meeting that we believe will meet the standard. But that's the area that I think is likely going to evolve fairly quickly. And that's the area that is probably hardest for people who buy a ready-to-fly vehicle for hobbyist use. So there's, I suspect that there will end up being little modules that attach on to like the little pins on the back of your TX16, and that, for example, you could easily attach that with just a few DuPont connectors and an air install, like in my thing, just hang it off the back of your transmitter. You could attach that and then get it to talk to your phone and get a position up, and then inject it over one of the bidirectional protocols that go up across RC. I think that would be doable. I haven't tried to implement it, but you probably could. Maybe that'll be how things go.
You'll get it done by tomorrow, Tridge.
No, got enough to do on the rest.
Time, Louis.
Well, no, before that, I put up there was the ASTM actually complained about that Z standard that the FAA won, and the FAA tried to that came in via our tips line. Thanks, tips line. The FAA were quite underhand about that whole Z thing. Lest they forget.
Yeah, it's difficult here, but it depends how you interpret it, right? They wanted to. You need to do a declaration of compliance, and that can do testing, but you can do testing, you know, out in the open. But in practice, I mean, I always stand under a tree when I'm flying, because, you know, I like the shade. Because I don't want to, the skin cancer is a problem in Australia. So I wear a hat, of course, but I also stand under a tree. And so my location accuracy would be a bit worse from GPS, but I think that's okay, because once you do your declaration of compliance of 95%, you've got to meet the standard 95% of the time in your testing regime, and using a mobile device newer than 2019, I think it all comes out. But that's the area that is, you know, probably the trickiest. Yeah.
Can you, just as a slight aside, would I get this code onto a T-beam? If you're not sure what that is, you probably don't know what those are. But
what chip? The T-beam. What microcontroller is it?
It's an ESP32.
Which variant of the ESP32? You need either the C3 or the S3.
Okay, they're not. Okay. All right. I will have to look. I'll look
Yeah.
at that. Otherwise, I'll make one tomorrow.
Sorry. At the moment we only support the C3 and the S3. There may be other variants of the ESP32 that can do it. I haven't looked into it. I was just relying, actually, David Buzz in Queensland. He did the port of Ardupilot to the ESP32. So he's been running and flying vehicles with, instead of having an STM32, he actually used one of these little things to fly the whole vehicle, right? So it actually is the flight controller. He just tacks on some sensors, some IMUs and things, and I think he did. He went to town and actually used some sticky tape and some Velcro and things. It was a pro install. And it really went to town. Probably a paddle pop stick or two in there as well. Anyway, he's been happily flying ESP32, so he helped me with the ESP32 side of things, because I've worked with the ESP8266 before, with the Wi-Fi stuff for Ardupilot Wi-Fi telemetry, but I haven't worked with the ESP32 before. So Buzz put me on the right track with that, and Buzz would know better about what all the capabilities are of the other ESP32s. I've only tried the C3 and the S3. So you'll have to double check the data sheets yourself to see what Bluetooth capabilities your chip has.
I get one in from China. It's a terrible subject, really. This, this is the TT Go beams. They're big, but
they're huge. It's got battery on the back and the whole lot. Yeah.
Everything you'd ever need. Everything you'd ever need. No, don't leave home without them. But it'd be fun to test. It'd be fun to test to see how far away I could see on the app.
Yeah, just get you one of these little things off eBay and have a play. And it's pretty easy to flash. Just plug it in a USB and flash it. And I made it so that it broadcasts as soon as it powers on. You don't have to do that with the standard. You can make it that it only broadcasts when you're armed to take off, right? But for them, I've made it a compile time option. So when you build the code, you can choose whether you want it to broadcast at power up. And when it does broadcast at power up and it doesn't have any data, it just broadcasts packets saying, I'm alive and you're not ready to arm because I have no idea where you are. Because it doesn't have any location data, etc. But it's useful so that if you flash it and you plug it in, you can at least tell that the firmware's running, because you fire up the app on your phone and it shows up. So I could plug in one now if you like and show you. If I power up one of these and I turn on my phone, how do you screen share from a Android phone to? Do you just hold it up to the lens, or is there some other?
I think that's what you do. Yeah.
This is the high-tech solution. I'm sure there's.
Well, there probably is, but you're forgetting that none
just
of us
write
are
some code, Tridge. So
that's
what you do.
This is the that's unreadable, isn't it? So if it's all the contrast is terrible. So anyway, you guys probably can't read that at all, I would guess. No. Maybe. There you go. You get some of the information at the right. Hold it at just the right angle. But if I stand on my left foot and stick my tongue out.
Exactly.
Now it's clearer. Yeah. There you go. Just at the right angle. Anyway, what it's saying remote ID system failure. It's telling me how often the packets are coming through. It's saying I'm getting both Bluetooth 4 and Bluetooth 5 and Wi-Fi NAN and but it's saying if you just power it up, it actually shows two drones. Funnily enough, the app considers the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth to be a separate vehicle. And sometimes it actually shows a lot more than two, because of the way Wi-Fi NAN works with its IDs. The IDs keep ticking over, and that when the IDs go up, it's the app shows it as a new drone. And so that's really a bug in the app that needs to be fixed, because otherwise it shows, if you leave it on for a while, you've got 30 drones, thinking, wow, okay, that's an easy way of getting a lot more drones. I just leave the app on. Anyway, I'm sure that'll be fixed in the app at some point. Anyway, you fire it up and you see two drones, Wi-Fi NAN and Bluetooth.
Are you aware of any more official apps from the police or whatever over there for
my guess is the police wouldn't release their app, but I don't know. I'm not aware of any other. This is the only one that I've got. It's open source. I mean, Open Drone ID, the organization released the code up on GitHub of their app, and I've been playing a bit with that, and it's been handy for debugging. When I was trying to get the Bluetooth stuff working, I was sort of, it's the first time I've used Android Studio, and the debug is not bad, actually. I was able to poke around a little bit in the code. I'm not a big fan of Java, but it seemed to work. Yeah, so there may well be other apps. I'd be surprised if the counter drone industry didn't release all. They will probably release all sorts of long range detection systems for this stuff, and charge people megabucks for that. That's bound to come.
Obviously, if it's open source and release, then that's good news for creating our own Find That Drone, Catch That Pilot website and page, or find
it's called
that
Mugware.
Okay. Let's skim commercial data of where they're flying, and all we'll need that just to get it in my head correctly. So as an operator, it's broadcasting on all those. You have to broadcast on all of them. You don't just pick one.
No, you have to broadcast on a subset to meet the mock. I mean, the means of compliance has a number of ways you can meet the standard, right? And the means of compliance talks, it has a list of a number of combinations of methods to meet the standard. And the method we chose is to do NAN and Bluetooth 4 and Bluetooth 5, but there are other ways of meeting the standard. Remember, the FAA deliberately chose a non-prescriptive approach for how to achieve what they want you to achieve. Then the ASTM then says, this method, we propose this method to achieve compliance. Then they go to the FAA, and the FAA says, yes, we agree that does meet what we want. And so the ASTM chose, there's a section in the I'm just bringing it up now. There it is. So there's section 4, which is which combinations of transmission modes will meet the standard. And we are following along the 4.2 option, which says to meet broadcast error correction and maximum range requirements in Part 89 to converge on better interoperability. This means the compliance requires broadcasting using methods 4.1.2 or 4.1.4. Now, 4.1.2 is the long-range Bluetooth 5. 4.1.4 is the Wi-Fi beacon. So we've implemented long-range Bluetooth 5, and just doing long-range Bluetooth 5 is sufficient to meet that mock. That means a compliance, right? So we could have just done long-range Bluetooth 5. We didn't just do that because most phones can't receive long-range Bluetooth 5, and that would be bloody annoying to have to buy a new phone just to test this stuff, right? So we also broadcast Bluetooth 4, which almost all phones can do, and we also broadcast Wi-Fi NAN, which covers the remaining phones that have broken Bluetooth stacks, right? And because we want people to be able to test this stuff without having to buy a new phone. And so that's why we do all three, but we could meet the standard with just Bluetooth 5. And some vendors, when you compile this firmware, you can choose just to do Bluetooth 5. And you may want to do that to minimize interference, because the Bluetooth 5 low bit rate, long range would almost certainly be the lowest interference broadcast method. Right, so I wouldn't be surprised if many of the vendors choose to disable the Wi-Fi NAN and the Bluetooth 4 and just do the Bluetooth 5 to minimize GPS and RC interference, because it's only going to be 1 packet per second, right? And 1 packet per second is not going to kill your RC. Just because RC is a hell of a lot more robust than that. Otherwise, planes would be falling out of the sky even more than they do now. So I expect that a bunch of vendors will choose just to do BT5, and probably a bunch of vendors are going to be buying these Samsung Galaxy S10e cheap secondhand phones because they can receive the long-range Bluetooth to testing, right? There's a long list of which phones can do what. I'm sorry?
When we set up our grid of commercial flight gathering data sites, best to make them Bluetooth 5 then, because that is really
if you were trying to detect drones in the air and build a map, you'd receive on all of the different modes, right? You'd set up a receiver for all, Bluetooth 4, Bluetooth 5, Wi-Fi NAND, Wi-Fi beacon, the whole bit, right? Because why not, right? But
yeah,
I personally, I think that setting up certainly publishing, making, doing a flight radar type thing, technically possible, ethically dubious.
Ethically dubious? Ethically dubious? When's that coming into this industry? Ethics? That's a place near London. Yes, that doesn't come into this. That doesn't come into this industry. But if you suspected your opposition were flying at a site, you would put 4 cars around it with an ESP32C2 or whatever it was. With a bit of your
C3
code, C3, and let it go the other way. Let it do the receiving. Surely,
we haven't written the receive code for this because we haven't needed to. You could write the receive code for these modules. I haven't bothered doing that because we haven't needed it. There's no. We might do it eventually for telemetry, say for swarms, that sort of thing. Now we've got some Bluetooth code. It would be interesting to investigate using it for as a telemetry system. Like a low interference, reasonable bit rate, couple of kilometer range telemetry system could be interesting, but we haven't started on that yet.
Sorry, having a bit of a pop at you. Really, I shouldn't be doing that. It's not your fault. I know it's
That's
not your idea. It's not your fault. I know that. I'm sorry, Tridge.
It wouldn't be Drone and Sundry if there weren't a dig or two.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, of course. Yes, insults fly.
That's expected.
The whole thing is. It's a terrible thing, but in some ways, I'm quite glad that America's testing it for the rest of us to prove it doesn't work. But anyway, so at least that's happening. We're going over an hour, so we're g'day, and we should go. We should just have a little bit of DJI stuff. Did we see that little spoofy video they did of some AR little tiny drone today?
Yeah, I did see that. They're on a bit of a ramp up at the moment. Again, I think they've been quiet for a while, and obviously we've got the launch on Thursday, although we've seen one crash already into the ocean, which made me chuckle a little bit.
I've really not seen that.
Yeah, it caught a wave and tipped itself over, but it's all the usual stuff. DJI will produce something fairly good. I think we know that. There's been a bit of hoo-ha. It's interesting over the Mavic 3, the Mavic 3, the first consumer drone to be officially
with a
C1 rated,
or is it?
It's interesting, or is it? It's an interesting comment, yeah, because there's a lot of people gone, including myself and many others have gone, how have you achieved that? Now, let's be clear, DJI have simply submitted the drone for certification to the only company, as I can see it, that can certify drones in Europe. And that company has certified it as legitimate. So there is some interesting ground here, because the bit I don't quite understand is the C rating had to be permanently marked on the aircraft's body. Now, either that's changed and it just hasn't been fed out to the real world yet, which is a very real possibility, or there could be a few games going on here between DJI, the testing house, and the European Union, because the EU have really dragged their heels over this and they've kicked it back and back. And look, Tridge mentioned earlier, the US has sort of woke up and gone, oh, we failed. We've got a month or whatever it is to get ready. Europe's in the opposite position of this case keep kicking back into the long grass again and again and again. And manufacturers must be getting a bit fed up, because look, all of the ready to fly manufacturers will just do whatever they need to do to comply. It really isn't a problem for someone like DJI. They will just look at what the compliance is and instigate that into the design and the production. It's fairly straightforward for them. The biggest issue for them is not knowing when. That's the problem. When they're piping out roadmaps in 2 or 3 years' time, they're sitting there going, well, do we need to make a change now? So it is interesting. Potentially it's legit with a custom firmware. It was interesting that you have to have this custom firmware, a bit like what Tridge was saying earlier with Ardupilot as well. Once you do it, there will be no going back. either. DJI will not allow you to revert it. And there is some comments about noise stroke power reduction. So I would be interested to see what effect that has on the flyability of the aircraft. Now, it will still work, but there will be people who think, oh, I want to get this, and then suddenly sit there and complain that it's has a drastic reduction in certain performance requirements. For instance, I don't know how sport mode could be compliant. Potentially that's got to go. You know,
I think I heard that EASA also weren't very happy with that testing house. so yeah, there's lots of Skinner around that whole thing.
I think it's very interesting. It's a bit of a hand grenade. It's a bit of a hand grenade. And look, if this is right, I don't see nothing wrong here. If we have a product that can comply and the only holdup is a damn marking on a plastic case, then why is that a major issue? That can be dealt with. We can do software compliance. Most hardware now, the phone doesn't really. If you look on an iPhone on the back, yes, it has the FCC numbers in absolutely minuscule writing. But if you want all of the details, the IMAI and all of that, there's a software page for compliance on all of this stuff now. That's what you've got in the drones as well. They can do this. They can even show it every time the aircraft is turned on. There are things they can do to show that that aircraft is running that correct firmware. So I actually think it's a good thing, but it was quite unexpected.
No, it certainly got people's attention, didn't it? It was very interesting.
Everyone,
as you said, it revved up the Mavic 3 sort of interest, didn't it? It was very clever, as ever with DJI. Very, very clever. When
it doesn't apply to the UK, and this is the confusion because everyone's gone, how do I get this? And you go, you can't, because we technically no longer have the C ratings in the UK. Yes, they're there, but they're basically heading out the door. We no longer have the remote ID that's been kicked into the long grass. And we're sort of left with this ongoing transitional situation in the UK, which actually is very good. The reality is they brought in some transitional rules that have been in place for 2+ years, and there hasn't been a single incident outside of the police having a habit of crashing their own aircraft that I can remember, or at least something of notable size. So why close the door on transitional class? You know, here's a classic example. If it's been absolutely fine for 2 years, then why close the door? What are you achieving?
Those airframes are all going to die, aren't they? In cupboards or you know, just in trees or whatever.
You know, outside of the Solo must be the longest living ready to fly aircraft I can think of. There aren't. If we think of DJI, there aren't really many Phantoms that people put. You know, I know Gary, you got one there that was buried with the.
Buzz has been having fun with the Solo. The Solo gimbal's always been. We've got lots of problems with the current Ardupilot releases with the Solo gimbal. So Buzz has his head deep inside the Solo, reworking things.
Still developing aircraft. It's incredible.
And there's a gimbal nodding thing. There was a problem with the gimbal firmware where it would, every time it received a Mavlink packet that it didn't expect, it would go nod the gimbal, and you get this nod. It's like it's acknowledging a packet. Got that packet.
That's not a default. That's a bug. That's a feature. That's a feature.
Yeah, you could actually send a pattern of packets and get it to go to the music. You know, you could get a bit of.
But it is interesting. You know, if you look, the Solo is probably the longest running ready-to-fly drone of existence. If we look on the DJI side, Mavics have got a 2 to 3 year lifespan, maybe 4 max. So we're already in that transitional class. All of the aircraft that we're in are already 50% of the way.
Should show you my. I've got Solos here, but I'll show you what my Solos look like. So here's one.
Stand by for some free space engineering.
So these are my sort of Solos, you know, and the main test Solo I've got. This is my primary test Solo. Right, so it's got a gimbal, right? See, I like these air installs, right? And there's that's the core of the Solo. There's all the electronics. You plug the battery in there. There's all the cables. It flies great. It's excellent.
In SITL.
We have SITL on hardware now. You can actually run the Ardupilot simulator on the flight controller now. So you can actually take that with no motors and everything attached and fire up the right firmware, and you can go flying it. And the physics emulation is actually happening on the H7 chip, which is really quite fun. And we did that for swarm stuff, so you can have a whole swarm of aircraft, and you want to test all of the communication links and that sort of stuff, and you just load this special SITL on hardware firmware. It's good fun.
SITL on hardware. That's because the hardware and the loop, it's all going round and round and round and round.
That's right. That's right.
And
you can.
What? Hey.
Oh, I've gone fuzzy again. It's there we go. There you go. Do the double flip with the cameras. And there you go. There's the back of my monitor. And back again and see if the camera. Yes, camera in it. Excellent.
I think the last time I messed with SITL was when I got told off by Henry when I updated the wiki and broke a load of stuff. So it's been.
Yeah. SITL's really good for testing. People often don't realize that you can actually you can connect hardware to SITL. So I do a lot of CAN development using SITL simulator, talking to real CAN devices, GPSs, etc. And even I do a fair bit with getting people, if somebody's got a new weird ESC or a GPS or something, I'd usually ask them, don't send it to me, because my desk is cluttered enough as it is, right? So instead I get them to pipe the data to me over the internet, and then I connect that into SITL, then I write the driver remotely, and then get it all working, and then give them a firmware for their real flight controller. It works really well. SITL's great for hardware development, strangely enough, so a fair number of drivers have been developed in that way.
Amazing.
Anyway,
that's it's all
software engineer geekery.
It's all well above my pay grade. Well above. I just marvel at the fact that I still struggle to find things that don't fly pretty well in the stock settings, and therefore I don't touch.
Oh no, there's plenty of things that need tuning.
Never move a slider. Never.
That's something that Betaflight does beautifully. I mean, they're little quads. You put Betaflight on your average quad and it just flies, right? And
4.3 was astonishing.
Don't.
It is.
Even
we've got a way to go.
Come on, Ardupilot flies beautifully out of the box with the default.
On a reasonable range of vehicles, but there's still more we could do, I think. And there was actually a new researcher that popped up this morning on our research channel on Discord, wanting to look again at the adaptive controllers, and I'm going to have a chat with him later today, because I'd love to get somewhat bigger range of adaptive controllers. And we've got Emre, a GSOC student, working on a pluggable control system where researchers can have, in flight, they can switch between their new experimental controller and the standard controller. So you can be flying around and flick the switch and it switches and they see how it goes. And if it flips upside down and tries to suicide, then they flick the switch back and, hopefully the normal controller recovers. Really nice work. So, I'm hoping that eventually we will get an adaptive controller that works over a wider range of vehicles out of the box.
Yeah, I would say that was the one thing I noticed. The last version of Betaflight 4.3, it virtually is perfect. You just install it. It doesn't matter if it's a 3, a 4, or 5.
They do typically have a narrower range of vehicles that they're targeting, right? Power to weight ratios and things. It is a narrower range. I mean, we've got Ardupilot flying some pretty big copters. The biggest one I'm aware of has a payload capacity of around a ton. That's a 4-bladed multicopter, and so it's a pretty big one. You can find the videos out there on YouTube if you have a look. Then there's other people that have ones that a couple of 100 kilos and this sort of thing. So trying to get a firmware that covers that full range, it's tricky. But
something that would be nice to see in Ardupilot, which is just taken off in Betaflight, is the profiles feature. I don't know if you've seen it. They've introduced now, so you've got a profile option now. So, for instance, when you install the software, and you can sort of click, there's a profiles page where you'll go, right, I'm using an Express LRS receiver. You just tap that button and all the configuration is done.
We do have a new multi-copter wizard thing that pops up on a fresh install in Mission Planner, which you put in the prop size and you put in, there's a couple of other basic things about your vehicle, and what it does is it then adjusts your parameters, the initial parameters to start with, based on those specs. So that's sort of along those lines, but receiver type, we pretty much auto detect the receiver anyway. So that's usually okay.
You need more parameters.
What Ian is mentioning is having banks of parameters, and be able to switch between banks of parameters.
We have standard and advanced at the moment parameters, so you can choose just to show the standard or show standard and advanced.
It's not even that, Louis. Well, it's even simpler than that. You install the software and you can go, right, that's the receiver I'm doing, button. That's the VTX I'm using, button. And all the configuration is done. There's no mess. You're just choosing the UART. You just say serial 1. So, and the nice thing is, it allows, and then you've got tunes based off that as well. So you can say, a 3 to 4 inch quad, choose that. And as you said earlier, 6 to 7, and it's similar.
That has always been a bit of our problem on Ardupilot is putting all the stuff that the flight controller does on the different ground stations. And that is
because there's a lot of different ground stations. I mean, the most popular one by far is Mission Planner. I run MavProxy myself as my ground station, and that's sort of an engineering ground station, really. Only a programmer could love
engineering,
it.
Or a geeky ground station.
It's very geeky ground station, so actually, what I could show you. No, probably, anyway, I often have 10 graphs up when I'm flying, with MavProxy and, quite complex setup. But and then, at the other end of the thing, there's, Ryan, hello, you're listening in. So Ryan's ported his adaptive control stuff to Copter. Excellent. So Ryan did his, I think it was his master's, did a thesis on adaptive control for fixed wing. And so he's just popped up to say that he's ported that to Copter as well, which is great. And so the guy who turned up on the research channel this morning, I pointed him at Ryan to have a chat there. So we haven't merged any of the adaptive control stuff in yet, but I'm hoping that someday we will. That'll be great. It's just got to be, the problem with adaptive control is sometimes you end up with more parameters to tweak the adaptive control than you would just with PIDs. So it doesn't necessarily simplify things.
Everybody loves parameters. You can't have enough of them.
The rate of the adaptive control,
so
how sensitive the adaptive control is.
That's right. So you end up with gains on the adaptive control and things, and from the end user's perspective, that's sort of indistinguishable from PIDs.
Adaptive control PID loop A.
We did do I did a new auto tuner called Quick Tune that we released in 4.2, which has really helped with quad planes, because the Q auto tune stuff it's a bit too violent on quad planes because it really tosses the aircraft around. But this new Quick Tune,
the first time.
It turns out it works really well for copters as well. There's quite a funny video from Randy where he tries it for the first time and he recorded it, and you can hear the surprise in his voice because he puts up this copter that's flying really badly. He runs Quick Tune, it just sits there for a few seconds, and it done. Quick Tune done. It hardly moves, and he tries flying it. You can hear the astonishment in his voice. It's much better. It actually worked. So clearly he didn't trust me, because I was trying to encourage him to go and try it, and it really worked well. So it's just it's basically an automation of manual tuning. It's your standard manual tuning method, just automated as a Lua script, and it works. So maybe you should try it on one of your quads.
Yeah. I haven't installed Ardupilot on something for a while, so it's probably time.
There you go. Time to go back.
You can try that on your Inspire if you still have it.
I got a nice 7-inch I've been building back here, and I did choose a flight controller specifically that worked across the board on the 3 stacks, because with that size aircraft, I wanted to be able to jump.
Those Matek,
yes.
The Mini?
Yes, it's the same one as you got, Louis. It's the actual.
Yeah, Matek makes a great range of gear. They've been, Samson has been fantastic to work with, making new gear all the time. He's put together some really nice little, one of my favorites is a new little adapter board that he brought out recently. See if I've got one here. So this is a STM32L431 adapter board that takes CAN, so that's a CAN JST-GH4 pin CAN port, And then what it does is 10 outputs here, which can do servos and ESCs. So basically you plug your servos and ESCs into these and it turns them all into CAN, servos and ESCs, with all the telemetry feedback and everything, which means you place that you've got this really robust differential signaling thing going out into your wings or wherever you want it to go, past all the noise and things with your motor wires, right? And this thing is dirt cheap little device and basically allows you to, convert to CAN the entire aircraft trivially.
So does it create individual IDs for each device then?
Yeah, that's right. So you can have your, a whole bunch of servos and then ESCs on this. So some people have, I've been saying for years that the correct quad plane design for robustness is an octaquad, coaxial octaquad with the top layer being a separate power from the battery from the bottom layer, completely independent power planes, top and bottom layer. So if you lose a complete power system, you're still flying, right? Because you can, as long as your thrust is sufficient, your hover throttle is, below a certain level, then you can fly with one layer out. And then you do CAN, so you make all of the ESCs with CAN with telemetry feedback for notch filtering. So all of your 8 motors are notch filtered with the frequencies or harmonics of each motor, right? And all of your servos are on CAN, which means you're wiring the problem with interference with radios interfering with PWM signal integrity issues you get in big aircraft. That just goes away with the differential signaling in CAN, vastly more robust. And so now with these things, we've got people flying that config that because it's become practical to do that. And these are quite big vehicles and they fly really, really well. It's great. So Samson from Matex has been fantastic at making little devices like that make a big difference to people putting together those sort of interesting vehicles.
Yeah. I still have one of those F9 or whatever it is, GPSs that are CAN enabled that can also run Ardupilot on the GPS.
The F9P from U-Blocks has been revolutionary in terms of accuracy of GPS and particularly the velocity accuracy is so much better, and good velocity accuracy massively helps with the EKF stability and the accuracy of navigation, precision landing, that sort of thing. GPS for yaw, fantastic if you're flying off ships and things with, ships are often made of metal and compasses don't tend to work so well. So, put on 2 F9P GPSs and use them for your yaw. So you basically have moving baseline between the GPSs. Great stuff. Been so delighted with the F9P and how well it's been doing. Good stuff.
And even now that Ardupilot brought the CAN protocol on in-house with the ArduCAN, it's much easier to develop the stuff
with drone CAN. Yeah, that's right. So we now run drone CAN development, and so the drone CAN GUI tool. The CAN over Mavlink has been great. So now when somebody in the UK, has problem with CAN setup, because CAN setup has been notoriously difficult in the past. And now I can say, hey, just forward the Mavlink telemetry to me. And then I actually get all the CAN packets, so I can actually analyze their CAN devices from the other side of the planet over this Mavlink link. And I can change the parameters on their CAN devices, on their ESCs, on their, whatever. That's been great. So that's what we call MavCAN.
I had a lot of videos on CAN in the early days, actually, when it was the other side, and they were actually very popular because it was painful. Even getting it to behave in Mission Planner was painful. I haven't actually tried it all since the switch over, because I know Sid did a huge amount of work on it, didn't he, in the background on the CAN side.
You can actually, in theory, if you have, say, an octaquad with 8 ESCs, in theory, you could actually, upgrade your ESCs one at a time in flight over the telemetry link. So land with a different firmware on your ESCs, then you take off. I think that'd be a great experiment.
I think that sometimes happens to mine anyway.
We should do a live flight sometime on Drone and Sundry where we forward telemetry and we have, drones flying in different countries and being, controlled remotely. I think that'd be great fun.
Oh, come on, Tridge.
Stand by and
you do
watch
that
now.
all the you do that all the time with SITL.
We could do it live. What could go wrong? You know, we use Ian's vehicle, so you know he doesn't mind if it crashes.
Yeah, and they're all perfectly airworthy. Every single last one of them.
Of course.
I foresee Chris was asking how far apart those two GPSs need to be for your sensor.
Well, so minimum practical distance is about 30 centimeters. If you set it as 10 centimeters, it'll try. But the thing is that the little bit of wobble in position accuracy will. The way it works is that Ardupilot gets a relative RTK fix between the two, which gives it the NED position between the two. And then Ardupilot requires that your GPS position parameters, the indication of that baseline distance, be within 20% of what the GPSs are reporting. So the shorter that distance, the less likely you're going to be within the 20% margin. So in practice, around 30 centimeters. But if you set it up as 20 and you had good sky view, it'd probably work. But most people set it up as like 50 or 60 centimeters because they tend to be using it on larger vehicles. But 30 certainly works.
Yeah. It is. A friend of mine uses it all the time because I know he's very.
It is good, and we normally do it with compass fallback. So what it does is when it's got GPS yaw lock, it uses that to learn your compass offsets that are consistent. So if you do lose the GPS yaw in flight, solar flare or whatever, then the compass is already calibrated against the GPS yaw, ready as a fallback to take over, which means you get a smooth transition. And of course we've got the ultimate fallback is our GSF yaw solution, which we can actually do yaw with a single GPS using the GSF Gaussian sum filter based yaw. That requires some movement to initialize, but that will initialize while you're flying. And if you lost GPS completely, you would be able to, or back to a single GPS, it would be able to fall back to GSF yaw and get home. It's one of the things people don't realize. You can fly Ardupilot, including in autonomous navigation modes with no compass, with a single GPS using GSF. And not many people do it because you've got to take off in a non-position oriented mode and get a little bit of acceleration for just move around a little bit, like do a little spiral takeoff. And once it's got that initial movement, it'll lock into the GSF solution, and then you can go fly autonomous missions with no compass. It's quite magic, really, if you think about the way GPS works, that you can actually get a yaw out of a GPS. It's basically the correlation between the GPS and the IMU accelerations.
Is that one of the many settings, or is that happening by default?
We have it by default in the background as an emergency yaw source, and so It was originally added because of a friend of mine's flight. And I won't name names, but if he's watching, he knows who he is. So where the canopy of an aircraft was. It was a copter, right? And the canopy was symmetric and had a GPS compass on the top, and he put it on backwards, right? And so I'm sure he denies this. But anyway, the compass was reversed off by 180 degrees. And so that means that it tries to, when it's trying to correct its position, it corrects in the wrong direction. So it gets worse, it corrects even more, and it basically, really goes off. And so the GSF is ideal for that because the acceleration you get from that is the perfect initialization for the GSF.
Right.
And so when it detects this is happening, it just kicks in this, it'll get a message up on your screen saying, emergency yaw. And this emergency yaw source will enable, and it'll fix itself, and then you keep flying. Good idea to then fix the compass for the next flight.
Yeah.
But it's really quite cute. It's a nice piece of maths done by Paul Riseborough. Very, very clever maths.
Yeah, you've reminded me. As soon as it Gaussian, I was keeping up with you ish, but it's just a word I recognise. The trouble when I speak to you, Tridge, is it's just many times there's words I just don't recognise. I don't know.
It's this Australian, you see.
And I just nod. I was just
English is a second language here.
That's what it is. That's what it is. I just sort of have to nod at the right sort of time and pretend.
I'm probably just making stuff up. These are. I've got a random word generator here.
No. Come on, Tridge. We all know that you have some hidden parameters on Ardupilot that control all of that. You
right,
the
yeah,
parameters
yeah.
on parameter groups.
No, I can bullshit with the best of them. It's just make stuff
how
up.
many parameters are up to now? Have we gone to 10,000 yet?
Ridiculous. We hide parameters that are unused. So if you've got like 9 rangefinders, but if you've got a rangefinder turned off, all of its parameters are hidden, right? If you turned everything on, turned on all 9 rangefinders, every possible feature, then it'd be, I don't know, a couple of hours, 2,500, something ridiculous like that. But
2,000.
In practice, people typically get around 1,000-ish on your typical vehicle because so many of them are hidden, which is still a ridiculous number, really. Absolutely ridiculous. We've got a neat trick in the latest, for 4.3 release, we've got a trick where it transmits not just the current parameters, but what the defaults are. So the ground station knows the defaults, so you can press a button to say, only show me the parameters that aren't the default. And that reduces the list down to a much more reasonable, right, and that makes stuff a lot easier.
Yeah, reasonable. Come on, Tridge.
But many vehicles, it's like 100, right, that are actually changed from the defaults.
Just like 12 years ago, we asked Michael Oborn to create the favorites parameters on Mission Planner.
That
helped a lot.
One of the first things I did when I started in the Ardupilot project was I added support for parameters over Mavlink, right? Because when I actually joined the project, to change your PIDs, you had to recompile. You edited the header file, edited the P, I, and D gains of your PIDs, recompiled, and loaded the firmware. That was how you tuned, right? And so I didn't like that. So I added this parameter system and the ability to live change parameters, and added in Mavlink support and that sort of thing. But the problem is we made it a bit too easy to add parameters, right? It's pretty trivial. And when you make it really easy to add parameters, whenever there's debate of should we do it this way or should we do it that way, let's just add another parameter. Yeah.
We just sorry. What you usually say is we just add a couple of parameters.
Yeah. And naming parameters. I mean, we've still got centidegrees in there on some parameters, which are a curse, an absolute curse.
Yes.
And then some of the parameters are in radians, and humans tend to think in degrees more than radians, and so we're not entirely consistent in our parameters. And then the poor, long-suffering ground station authors have to then try and cope with that, and it's tricky. I hate the centidegrees parameters. They're just. I've had some funny things where people had. It was a guy that set up this lovely fixed wing plane, quite a large fixed wing rolling takeoff type plane, and he set his limit roll CD to I think 15. 15. So what he meant was 15 degrees maximum roll, but it actually was 15 centidegrees, and the thing did a beautiful takeoff, absolutely gorgeous takeoff, and just kept going. Because maximum bank angle of 0.15 degrees, it's a very large turn radius. And so then I changed the parameter. I added a pre-flight, arming check, right? That you have to have a minimum amount of bank angle, right? You can't go below that. And so I thought, problem solved, right? Not going to happen again. So then a guy was tuning a quad plane, and I did it as an arming check on this thing, right? But mid-flight, he started changing the parameters, and he changed the lim roll CD to a read like 20, thinking I'm going to make it 20-degree bank angle with this quad plane. And just at the time he hit the right parameter, he got a phone call from his wife, and he was chatting to his wife then and not watching the drone. Then we look back up, it was way off in the distance, right? Because again, he'd set it as 20 centidegrees. So now we have to have a minimum bank angle that's checked live, right? So this is. Every time we get an incident like that, we have to have cope with it. But that time was okay because he was still in telemetry range. He just forced a Q land and it landed, and he went and got the drone and then asked me about it and said, well, okay, you set maximum bank angle of 20 centidegrees, and when you update a parameter, make sure you've got eyes on the aircraft. Don't answer your phone.
Certain. Yeah, but sometimes you have to answer the phone, don't you? Especially when it's that important call. There's no excuses then. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we're definitely going into waffle mode, and we've had Tridge for an hour and a half, and he's got to get more coffee now.
Indeed.
Human factor. Mitchell. Actually, I'm going to put that in. Mitchell, it's human factors. That's very, very, very true. And human factors need to definitely be pulled into this conversation one day in a more serious way. But is there any other news that we should talk about before we go?
I believe the only relevant news was that crazy video of the Mavic flying in the
Everest.
Everest Mountain.
Yeah, very, very
that
impressive.
Was a very good publicity stunt from the guys. This is. I believe they are doing a coordinated effort to promote the Mavic 3. So they might not be selling the Mavic 3 as they want, so they are pushing the Mavic 3. All that stuff with C markings on the Mavic 3, these promotional videos, it's something to watch out. Perhaps they should lower the price. That would be a nice one.
I can't imagine it's sold particularly well based on the pricing and what's happened in the world. You know, let's just look. The world has melted down from a financial point of view in this year. It is a fear period. You know, February onwards, things started getting a bit weird. It was an expensive drone before you start. People are facing a cost of living income issue. You've got more strikes than ever, so it's hardly surprising that things aren't selling. The problem with DJI is that they've hit this iPhone plateau. Anyone who's had an iPhone, and not many people, I know most of you are bloody Android users, but anyone who's had an iPhone after about the 8th and iPhone 8, they're all to a point just slightly better versions of what came before it, and that's been the case. You know, DJI perfected the camera drone probably with the Phantom 4.
You're wrong. All the new devices, be it an iPhone or a DJI, smells better than the last one.
It might smell better.
Funny enough.
They always smell better, like a brand new MacBook, Louis. You know what I mean? When you open a new MacBook, it smells amazing, and it makes you think that $2,000 I've just spent was worth it.
$2,000? Come on, you were cheap.
Yeah, sorry, 3 these days. But I remember when they were 2. But yeah, I can imagine they're struggling a little bit. I keep getting a lot of sales emails from them. I've noticed that. I've been getting a lot of that. It'll be interesting. What will be interesting is how this launch goes this week, and how there's a lot of people I know haven't got the new product. The normal KOLs who would usually be involved haven't. So it'll be interesting to see how this is done. But DJI is a lifestyle company now. They're not selling you drones. They're selling you a way of life. They're like Harley Davidson. They're not selling you a motorbike. They're selling you a dream. And that's what DJI is doing. Dream, climb the mountain and fly your
sad
drone.
muppet you are if a drone
change
is
your
your
name to
life.
Brown.
Midlife crisis.
You're sucking their you're sucking you really
right.
want on
Children, look
on
away,
the
look away,
good
children,
guys.
cover your
Look
ears.
away now, yes.
Come on,
But I am
Ian.
right. That's what they're marketing to.
Come on.
Trust me, I've
You're
read the
trying to
marketing
get out
material.
of the naughty boys list.
No, I'll never be out of the naughty boys list. They basically told me that straight. You can't say some of the things I've said and not be not in the naughty boys list.
Okay.
It's
Hard telling the truth.
Especially in this game. Especially in this game.
Tridge, you wouldn't understand it when companies have problems. They, believe it or not, outside of Ardupilot, they don't own up to it and go, oops, that was a bit stupid. You better fix that. They basically bury it in the ground as deep as they can and pretend it didn't happen. So
that's one of the big advantages of open source. You know, you can't hide away like that, and long term, it's better for the project, right? That you do actually publicize and you own up to your errors and you fix them publicly. It's good. It's painful when it happens, right? And we've had our share of bugs, but it's better long term for the project. You end up with less issues longer term.
But you learn from that pain. And that pain is what stops you doing the same thing again in future. And
Oh, we still have more. We still, you
Yeah.
know,
But
more
you know what
pain
I
to
mean?
find.
The
at
pain
the
is the
complexity.
pain is the reason you look at something and go, oh, before we do that, we now need to look at this.
That's
this,
right. And we, you know, like Peter Barker's been doing enormous things with our automated testing system, and you know, it's with trying to find issues before they're a problem, and that's really helped. It's been great work.
It's just sad.
I think,
the
well, you know,
commercial
we're going to
industry-
see. I think in the near future, we're not going to see too many new autopilots. Maybe we'll see some with more integration of different things. But we're definitely
actual flight controllers. There's going to be lots more. There's going to be lots more. I mean, we've got the huge number. I mean, I had another vendor contact me yesterday with another couple of flight controllers. I mean, several times a month. And you
different? Are they something else, or are they just?
You got a different name.
Name.
You know.
Oh, okay. Well, that's
and a
all right
different
then.
color.
Yeah, I've been waiting for Philip.
People, you know, there are variants on it, and there are different levels of integration. You know, the different take on the all-in-ones, and you know, there are definitely some innovations. I mean, in the higher end, the cube bread stuff that Philip's doing is really exciting. That's with the dual processor, Ethernet integration, and just little thing like the USB and SD card on the top, so you can actually get at the damn thing and don't lose the SD card in the grass every time. I mean, because it springs out. I mean, I'm sure that there's some special little hardware device to make it seek the point between the grass blades, so you can't find the SD card when it comes out, and because it springs out of the vehicle. But yeah, those sort of little things. The CAN FD 8 megabit CAN, that's really nice as far as new types of sensors and new capabilities. That's great stuff. Some really nice work with Ethernet being done by Sid and Tom. Yeah, there's a few interesting things.
Oh, hang on, no, I'm not supposed to share that. I'll stop sharing that. Sorry, shouldn't have done that.
Okay, mine doesn't look like that. I've got an early prototype. It looks,
I don't know
a bit
about
more
it.
prototypey.
Anything anymore.
I don't think Philip would mind me showing that. I've got my drawer full of odds and sod flight controllers, So hey, I'll just show you the whole drawer. This is my drawer full of weird and wonderful flight controllers. So somewhere in here there's a cube red. And
it might be the red one, Tridge. It might be.
No, but it's not red.
One.
I mean, the prototype is not red. The red is there. It is. Here she is. There. Yeah. I'm sure Philip won't mind me showing that.
No, it can't. But it's not one.
It's the CC3D.
But this has got all the debug stuff on it and this sort of thing. Notice the USB and SD card on the top. Yep. Yeah. So anyway, there's all sorts of interesting ones. There's with a Qualcomm board, and I mean all sorts of weird ones I've got in here. A very early cube. Yeah.
Oh, we've all got one.
Anyway.
Hey Tridge, the drawer is kind of empty. Have you been dumping things during COVID? I remember seeing that much full than it is now.
Oh, that's only one drawer of many drawers. My desk has a lot of weird and wonderful stuff on it. Yeah. Anyway, my wife occasionally tidies up, tries to help me tidy up a little bit. And she bought me those drawers quite recently.
So she needed
she pops out to Bunnings and comes back with another like 20 drawers, and
you needed the dining room table, was it?
The dining room table, yes. Well, you've probably seen my dining room table photos. I wonder whether I've got my I've got a photo here somewhere showing my dining room table when I'm doing a build. So somewhere here, where do I have? Yeah, not sure I can necessarily find it. But anyway, yeah, my dining room table gets interesting. When people come over to visit, often if it's like a husband and wife come over, then the wife is horrified. The husband says, "Oh, I'd like to do that at home," and we converted the dining room table to building of, you know, hobbies, and Sue's into crafting and hobbies as well. And then we took the attitude, we originally didn't want to do that because we thought, oh, you know, our visitors might not like it. And then we decided, well, if any of our visitors don't like it, then we don't want them as friends anyway. So that was easily solved. I
think we've inadvertently done a bit of a flippin', you know how DJI leaks everything.
Here it is.
We've inadvertently.
That's just old age, Gary. We all do that in the end.
No, but what I'm like, as Tridge was saying earlier with his air installations, I want to say that this was a carefully crafted media leak, you know, and we've spent 3 months working out how to do this. Is that what it is? Something like that.
Yes, we even got the FAA to introduce remote ID solely for this purpose.
Solely.
There you go. There's my dining room table as of a couple of years ago, and it's got more stuff now.
I remember we had I remember us having a chat for whatever reason, and that was all in the background. I remember.
Yeah, so this is an octaquad. That's an octaquad quad plane.
Very famous one.
And then it was good fun.
Yeah, it was. It was all happy days. So hang on, I've got another screen which I've been instructed via the media channel special chat communications that we have to place up. So I'll put it there.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah. Apparently some dodgy bloke sending me images on the internet. I can't. I'm a fool to myself for accepting them, I suppose, and it can end up very badly. But so far, there's that one. So
right,
yes, it's got a hose pipe attachment.
It's got
looking forward to that. It's all sorts of interesting possibilities with the, you know, redundancy stuff. Really interesting.
So there could be 2 boards on each of those connectors, then I suppose, doubling up.
Yeah. So you know, some of the higher end vehicles want to have like full flight controller redundancy, and some people are flying it out. There's a number of vendors flying triple redundant flight controllers with Ardupilot at the moment. But at the moment it's a bit tricky to set that up. This will make that type of thing easier.
Yeah. There we are. the full DJI link.
Well, I've learned something anyway. So
yeah. Oh dear. Well, I think we should go on that bombshell, or do we? No, we don't hang around for another 9 minutes, make it 2 hours. That was brilliant. Thanks.
We already made Philip.
Yeah, sorry, Philip. But there we are. Unsolicited pictures. Yeah, there should be. What's the barber in it for? As well, someone said it's a sewer pipe, isn't it? That's what you said, wasn't it, Ian? That's
hose pipe.
Like. Hose pipe. No, that's right.
That's for
it's the water-cooled version.
Yeah,
water-cooled version. And then it must have all the LEDs and the spinning things like PCs do, don't they? Anyway, RGB, the whole all on there. Yeah, and a little speaker for that nodding camera.
Don't start giving him more ideas. Come on,
he's already got the LEDs.
He'll do it. He'll do it.
Already got the LEDs.
Yeah, he does. All right, Divya, wherever in the world, thank you very much. Tridge, thank you very much as ever for taking the time to join the niggas. And about 2 hours ago, explaining RID. So if you want to rewind this one to talk about the actual topic, that was right back at the beginning. Lovely to see you again, Louis, Bruce, and Ian. And we'll see you all again 2100 GMT next week. Look after yourselves wherever you are in the world. Cheers all. Oh, not offline. What's that? Offline.